Right. We still see a lot of you still joining us right now, but going to get started. Really just want to welcome you all and really thank you for joining us. We're really thrilled to be able to have this event underway today. We've been working some time on it and we have a lot to share with you. So we're really glad to have this discussion. Our title today of this discussion is Scaling Digital Health Globally, Navigating National Pathways for Patient Access. And my name is Megan Coder. I'm the VP of Product and Policy here within Dime. And I will be your host for most of this. And then I'll be sharing, co-hosting, co-moderating opportunities with my colleague, Lacey. So today, based upon some housekeeping ideas, we have a number of different time zones represented here today. For some of us on this webinar, it's very late in the night, and for others, it's very early in the morning. And for others, it's probably 2 a.m. and probably not the right time to be listening to webinar. So we will be sending out this recording to everyone who registered for this event, just to make sure that you and they have access to what we're discussing. If you have questions, we welcome you to type your questions into the chat function. Lacey, myself, and a few other colleagues will be keeping track of that, and we'll make sure we weave in your discussion topics into the discussion and or dive into discussion in the chat function itself. From there, I'd like to share today's agenda. So for our agenda today, we have an overview of the project resources that we are launching today. We're going to dive into a lot of what we've been working on and what will be really beneficial, hopefully, to you as you progress down your pathways. We have 2 panel discussions today featuring our project partners. We'll talk a little bit more about next steps and where we're headed with this, and then closing remarks will be delivered by our CEO, Jennifer Goldsack. So let's go into the basics around who Dime is. Let's start there before we dive into the project itself. So Dime is the Digital Medicine Society. We convene and activate leaders, innovators, and enthusiasts from around the globe, really at the intersection of digital health innovation and healthcare. So what that means is our mission is really looking at how do we advance the effective, equitable, and safe use of digital approaches, really looking at how do we redefine aspects of healthcare to improve lives. So with that, Dime hosts a myriad of opportunities and projects. One of those is being discussed here today. And this project is the International Digital Health Regulatory Pathways Initiative and effort. For the duration of this project, we have worked with an incredible group of individuals and companies, all of who are listed here. This team has really come together over the past year, and we've really looked at how do we help assess different patient access pathways within the global market. And our primary areas of focus have really been looking at Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America regions, and really focus on digital health technologies that qualify as a medical device. And I'll get into more of the in-scope, out-of-scope topics later, but at a high level, this is really what we've been focused on. And this team has really looked at how do we deliver something that's really going to make a difference and an impact. So in addition to this team, I also want to do a thank you and shout out to all my colleagues at Dime who have taken what we've done throughout this project and translated from Google Docs into something that's going to be interactive and usable and valuable. So with that, it's been a huge team effort, and now we get to dive into the fun part here. So why are we here and why have we done this? Existing reality right now. We recognize that we are working in an environment where uncertainty really does inhibit growth. Digital health technologies, DHT, just in case we weren't clear about that description there, really are facing a lot of market dynamics and challenges that are exciting to some, frustrating to others. And really, though, the main goal of everything we're doing is looking at how do we impact patient care across the board. So what we've been looking at from our perspective here is we've been seeing people trying to take a market-by-market approach. And multi-market approaches are fantastic to make sure that if you have a therapy that is going to be able to impact, or a diagnostic or remote patient monitoring tool, or a clinical decision support service or tool, how do you really make sure that it helps the patients and gets to the patients that need it most? And sometimes it can be quite inefficient to do a country-by-country approach if you haven't been able to map what's taking place and identify where efficiencies could actually start to emerge. We've also seen an environment where case-by-case determinations are being made. So oftentimes decision makers will set their own criteria and have different expectations around what they think good looks like. makes sense in many regards, but there also then becomes a problem related to hindering the adoption and growth and scale of these digital health technologies, both within countries and then across jurisdictions. And we've also seen this idea that there are sometimes very few incentives for regulators or other decision makers to really be able to accept evidence generated outside of their jurisdiction. So while at face value, okay, we can make that work, it really does create a new hurdle for these technologies and these companies into really getting that scalability within and across jurisdictions. And then the last, inequitable access. By background, I'm a pharmacist. And from my perspective, I've seen very few pharmaceuticals actually take a single market approach, whereas digital health technologies are often living within that ecosystem and have a more limited opportunity of those market access perspectives. So what we've been trying to do is identify where can we start to look for opportunities for scalability? How can we start to move towards that idea of that multi-market digital health technology approaches is what needs to be done? And how do we start to really look at how patient access can be distributed in a much more equitable manner? So that brings us to what our main purpose is and our aim is. We're really looking at how do we identify overall business strategies that are actually incorporating these different regulatory pathways and perspectives. We're looking at how do we equip different evolving, how do we equip developers to really start to map their pathways forward and really start to chart their course in this really complex and quickly evolving ecosystem. I mentioned here just how fast things are evolving. From the beginning of this project to where we are today, entirely new pathways have emerged, which is fantastic. But at the same time, it's hard to know where to look and what's taking place and what's draft, what's final, what's binding, what's non-binding. So those are a lot of discussion topics embedded within our work. And then lastly here, we're looking at clinical evidence. Clinical evidence is a really big focus of this initiative and really drove a lot of the first part of this. We're looking at, are there ways to identify efficiencies and where developers can use clinical evidence across jurisdictions and across borders and really lead more into what we're aiming to accomplish here today. So with that said, how do we get here? So we've taken 3 primary steps. As I mentioned, we have our whole team that's been with us from the onset, and we've really done a lot of work on the research analysis side. We've done a lot of work with KOLs and SMEs, key opinion leaders, and subject matter experts within each of our countries of focus. Without them, it would be really difficult for us to understand what's taking place. And then we've also hosted a workshop where we brought together a lot of these individuals and really spent some time looking at what are the hurdles, what are the barriers, what are the challenges, and what can we do to overcome some of these, and how do we work together to achieve what our really true end goals are. So with that, I am glad to introduce to you our set of resources. So we are launching today this webpage, and it really embodies the work that we have accomplished over this time. So in-scope criteria for this may just be a helpful starting point just to go over. So as I mentioned, we are looking at digital health technologies that qualify as a medical device. We're looking at those at the national level. We're not looking as much at local or even city level pathways. We're looking at regulatory and product assessment, which includes HTA, health technology assessment. We're also looking at clinical evidence requirements, primarily as opposed to the health economic outcome side. So you'll hear much more today about clinical evidence than you will about health economic outcomes. And then we're looking at 4 different product types, primarily looking at remote patient monitoring, digital diagnostics, digital therapeutics, and clinical decision supports. And that's really our way to start to map out the diversity of the ecosystem and where the different products will fit within different pathways. So with that, this next slide goes over just the types of resources that we've pulled together. It really summarizes well of all the countries we've looked at. We've had 8 focus countries listed here, and each of the resources on the far left side here, we've made 1 resource per country, and then we have a series of additional resources. And I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of each of these today. So where this started was in August, we were able to put together a comment in the NPJ Digital Medicine. And our project team came together to talk about what are the components that we think are necessary to have in order to have an actual scalable pathway to market and patient access pathway within a single country. And we've identified 4 components, and you will see these 4 components consistently throughout all of our work. Those are regulatory authorization, product value assessment, which also includes HTA. We're looking at pricing reimbursement, and then also patient access infrastructure. And what we've done is we've taken this approach of how can we understand what's going on within each of these countries under this premise of these 4 steps and components listed here. So regulatory authorization is one critical step, and we hear a lot about that. And every single country we looked at in this process has a national level regulatory authorization pathway, which is fantastic. However, not everyone has national pathways for these 3 other components, which do significantly impact the scalability of digital health technologies within those countries. So let's dive on in to the first one. So national companion guides are the main source of truth from our perspective right now on each of these countries. So when you go to the website, you'll be able to click on these different links in a few different places. And when you click on Australia or China or Japan or so forth, you'll be brought to that country page. And on that country page, there's going to be a number of things you'll be able to navigate through. On each page, we've included a snapshot table that really highlights for those full stack components that we just discussed on both the national and the local side, what those availabilities are from the national and then the local sides within that country. You'll also then be able to scroll down the page and find a flowchart that provides a step-by-step overview of the national policy full stack components. It may sound confusing now, but once you get to those pages, you'll be able to see what it looks like, and I'll show an example in just a moment. After that, we've also included a curated overview of clinical evidence requirements within each of those countries. What are some of the lessons learned? What are some of the things that we found within regulations or legislation about clinical evidence that's required within that country, or where clinical evidence could be brought in from outside of the country too? And then we include a whole section dedicated to how do you actually go ahead and engage with a regulatory body. So that is a drop-down section that you can expand and find questions related to who should I be talking with and when should I talk with them? Is there a pre-submission process? And so forth. And then we wrap everything up with a glossary of terms that's specific to that country. We've noticed that there may be the same term for a medical device, but different definitions of a medical device in different countries. So we've included a series of glossary terms at the bottom of each page, so it's specific to what is taking place within that jurisdiction. So what does this look like? Example here for Germany is the patient access snapshot, which you'll see on the left side, and then the flowchart is on the right side. On the website, go ahead and scroll into that and be able to enlarge it to see what the pathway processes are. But this is our attempt to be able to really map out what the steps are and what should you as a developer know about as you pursue this, or you as a policymaker know about how other countries are approaching this, or any other type of stakeholder engaged. So there's a key associated with different colors and format perspectives on each flowchart, so you'll be able to see all of that. But this is our chance to really start to bring to life what some of this looks like in real life and where there may not be a pathway forward for a type of a technology. We've acknowledged that too by putting those little red hexagons in. So more to come on that, but let's move to the next resource. So our next resource is a how-to guide on how national pathways are evolving on both from a global standpoint for AI, artificial intelligence, and ML, machine learning. And what we've done is we've tried to make this much more of an evergreen document that helps the developer start to understand if you have AI ML embedded in your product, where should you look and how should you stay up to date on what some of the changes are that are taking place? What is a binding recommendation or requirement versus a non-binding recommendation or best practice? So we've tried to map out what's taking place in the international sphere, what's going on locally, and then what's taking place at the national level, and give developers a sense of how they should start to approach this. So with that, I am now pleased to turn this over to my colleague, Lacey. Lacey's helped steer this project every step of the way, and she's going to walk us through our final 2 resources and then also lead us into our first panel. So Lacey, I turn the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Megan. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to highlight the case studies that we developed as part of this project. They were extremely fun to pull together. It's always exciting and interesting to pull together those real world examples. And we took this opportunity to bring together individuals from these different companies listed to walk through some real world examples of how to successfully navigate these environments and these challenges, with some insights on market entry strategies, as well as evidence generation through different pathways. We wanted to offer practical lessons and best practices for overcoming some of the hurdles that we'll talk about a little bit later and that DHT developers sometimes face in scaling these tools. So there's 6 case studies, and we dropped a link to one of them, but if you dive into the website, you will see each of them, and they each tell a different story. So I encourage you to read through each of them. And then in terms of our next resource, the Library of Digital Health Regulations was a resource that DIME had already developed, but at that time we only had US regulations and guidances listed. And we have taken this and we have expanded it significantly. And this is a completely searchable, completely filterable tool that's built through Airtable. So you can type in anything that's relevant to you at the stage that you are developing. And we anticipate this will be a continuously updated repository. And we wanted to offer developers a reliable source of guidances in a rapidly developing ecosystem. So we are excited about that resource and encourage you to dig in there. There is over 300 resources, and it will continue to grow. We, on that note, recognize that this is an extremely dynamic ecosystem, and it will require what we have captured here is a snapshot in time, and we encourage everyone to share insights as these policies develop and shift. We anticipate they will. We hope they will. There's a feedback mechanism that is built into the website, as you can see on the slide, and we welcome any insights, revisions, and new developments as they occur. So I'm very excited now to welcome our first group of panelists who will be helping me to tackle the topic of the impact that multi-market strategies can have on patient care and commercial viability. So I will give our panelists a minute or two to come up, and then we can dive in. Hi, everyone. So today we have Brian Flatley, the VP of Consulting Services at S3 Connected Health. Hi, Brian. We also have Shani Frankel. She is part of the regulatory affairs team at Google Health, and Marissa Kopp, who will actually be wearing 2 hats on our panel today. She is the task force lead for European and international topics at SVDGV. No one thought I was actually going to try to tackle that, right? And the other as the Director of Market Access at Oviva. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited for this panel. So we can go right ahead and dive in. Why do you think that multi-market strategies for DHTs are essential at improving patient care? Megan alluded earlier that in the pharmaceutical field, a drug can have significant clinical impact, but it's rarely limited to one country. DHTs currently face much narrower scope of adoption. Let's start with you, Brian. Could you share your insights on this difference and why you think that a multi-market strategy is vital for patient access?
Thanks, Lacey, and thanks for having us today. It is absolutely vital. So if I was thinking about, a single country strategy where you've identified a condition-specific need that a digital health technology is addressing, it's unlikely that that is unique to that country. So it's important from a patient access perspective that we understand and shine a light on how you can scale that and make a meaningful impact on patients across multiple countries with that same technology. in addition is that we face this question of scaling and evidence as well. But when we can identify paths to scaling and multi-country deployments, you get an increase of real world data to really help improve technology optimization, product market fit, and addressing core needs of those patients. So from a digital health technology perspective, on the patient side, I think it's really important that we can help both, we say, the producers and those that are trying to scale them identify how to do that. And it is quite different from traditional pharmaceuticals in the same way that traditional medical devices are different from traditional pharmaceuticals in terms of how you scale. But I think what we're looking at here is a new sector. And so both of the other two have a well-trodden path for market access and how to scale, notwithstanding, of course, challenges that a new drug might face in first in class or a new patient population. But at the end of the day, you have a very large group of people with deep domain experience. When we flip that to DTHs, you have a new industry, new modality, new pathways to identify. And that's a kind of a triple whammy where when we look at the full stack, they aren't there as well. So I think those are some of the challenges that you face in trying to plot the path for scaling.
Absolutely. Shani, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you. So, on top of everything Brian said, one of the things that come to mind to me when I think about differences between the pharma world and the digital health technologies world is the issue of customization. For example, when you're looking at a new drug, right, rarely are you being asked by every hospital, right, or every system to customize your product, or even every country. You might have different practice of medicine in different places, so you might be prescribed differently. But when you're thinking about digital health technologies, on the other hand, it's quite it's quite common that you have different laws, different regulations, different requirements, be it, at a system level, having to interface with different systems, at a localization level, right? Beyond having to localize just your traditional labeling like an IFU, right? Then you have basically sometimes every line of your product, right? Being a digital product has to be localized. And then you have things like local regulations that you have to meet, like data privacy laws that controls where your data can be saved or how it flows, things like the new EU AI Act, right? So there are a lot of things that require adaptations that are quite specific to digital health, and those are constantly evolving, as Brian already mentioned. And so being able to plan ahead, right? Understanding what those adaptations would be and knowing where you want to go can really help with building a strategy and then building a product that meets that multiple country strategy upfront, rather than doing this as an afterthought later, which has, creates a lot of tech debt and a lot of issues along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. The impact of time and cost alone is such a significant highlight. If we're going to get tools into the hands of patients, then the companies need to be able to survive that process. Which brings us to Marissa. So what added value do you see in a multi-market strategy for DHTs from a commercial standpoint?
Yeah, speaking of time and costs, I do think that the multi-market strategy is really what companies benefit from if they want to create synergies. So maybe taking Oviva as an example, we have basically ran all our programs in 4 different countries, nowadays only 3, based on 2 almost identical medical devices. So all the work that we have to put into maintaining the quality and the compliance requirements for our platform, and we understand our product as a platform in that regard, to really create synergies. And it makes it much easier, costs less, obviously. And additionally, I do think, aside from the compliance requirements that can create important synergies, there's obviously the big bucket of evidence generation where we strive for more harmonization. And I'm very glad that this will be deep dived in the next panel. So I guess these are actually the real benefits that a company needs to create synergies. Secondly, and that comes a bit back to what Brian alluded to earlier, I do think despite all the heterogeneities across the countries, and there will always be because we're talking healthcare, and healthcare is so different in terms of the culture of the country and the policy, how it's set up, how the history has shaped it. I do think still the key motivation for a multi-market strategy lies in the similarity of the challenges that the markets are facing. Because I guess globally, conditions like weight-related diseases, obesity, diabetes, at the same time mental health conditions are really those who are driving the big cost expenditures in the countries, while at the same time we experience shortage of workforce. So a couple of healthcare professionals kind of have to treat this huge pandemic of diseases when it comes to weight-related diseases or mental health conditions. And this can and this must actually be in the future the unique selling point of innovative DHTs, because what we want to provide is personalized digital care at scale, ideally across country borders, but that needs a multi-market strategy, because otherwise we cannot really tackle the healthcare issues that the countries are currently facing.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. It's so important. And that's one of the reasons that we brought this group together to try and solve, or not solve, we are not solving, but to tackle this and to get that conversation started. And our workshop was an amazing example of talking about that harmonization and just how transferable is that clinical evidence, and how can we look at these populations across borders and realize how similar they truly are, as opposed to assuming that they're completely disparate. So we've talked about how important these strategies are. Let's go back to you briefly, Marissa. What do you think the biggest hurdles are that you've encountered in tackling this strategy? As Megan alluded to earlier, through this project, we highlighted our full stack, our 4 core policy components: regulatory authorization, product assessment, pricing and reimbursement, and patient access infrastructure. And what we saw through the project was that the addressing of those 4 components from country to country varies widely. So how do these align with some of the challenges that you and Oviva have faced in your strategy?
Sure. So I'm still very happy that we managed to actually list 4 components, because I think we had intense discussions about the 4th one, if I remember correctly, which is the patient access component, because it typically does not really pop up in our minds if we think of, okay, how can we get reimbursement? Or how can, and after the product is assessed, after you brought all the evidence, so there is a price, it's reimbursed, the evidence was accepted, and it's safe to use. But actually, with ticking these boxes, it does not really fulfill the role that the DHT needs to serve in the patient's hands. And from our experience, as one of the DiGA companies in Germany, who were all really enthusiastically looking over to France when France launched its PICON framework, which is supposed to be really similar to DiGA. Now, after 1.5 years, after that policy has been launched, there is still actually no pathway for the patient access, which is why the applications to get reimbursed in France are still on a very, very low level, and there has not been any successful case yet. So I do think what's really a hurdle for companies there is that the predictability of a business model that you can actually realize then in the end is really missing. And I think this is a big hurdle, not only for the company, but in the end also for the policymakers, because they wanted to provide an innovative pathway over there, but the last piece is missing, sort of.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about how that last mile, that last little component, the true impact of not having infrastructure in place to get this into the hands of the clinicians and the patients can impede everything that you've worked for. And, you know, our team built this image, and we really thought hard about how it's not actually a staircase, it's not actually a line, it's not actually a timeline, that all of those pieces are important and they all build together in order to make the whole picture. So Shani, let's move over to you. How do you think that the resources that we developed in this project will directly support the stakeholders in overcoming these challenges?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, I think these resources really streamline the access to relevant and much needed information. And when you think about knowledge gaps that companies are facing, you can kind of think of two parts, right? One is the things that you don't know, right? This is where things like the resource library can come in and really help you dig. You already have a thread, but you need to find the actual information to be able to act on it and incorporate it. But then you have this other part in knowledge gaps with the things that you don't know, right? And this is where things like those country charts and the examples, right, that you have case studies can really highlight for companies and developers what they may not have even thought about, right? And with those, you can really address, right? You can start thinking long term, whether it's international expansion where you want to reach more countries, or whether you're focusing on a few countries, but you want to get to those different components, right? Including patient access and maybe reimbursement. So really that longer term, not just that initial regulatory authorization piece, which is often that first hurdle that developers think about. And that can really help companies and developers build together strategies, testing strategies, whether it's non-clinical, whether it's clinical, human factors, incorporating the requirements that they now know are there and foreseeing roadblocks that they may not have known they would get to, and maybe utilizing pathways to get to broader or faster patient access that they may not have otherwise known exist. So our hope is that this can really help us and developers as a whole get products faster and broader to users that can benefit from them and live healthier lives.
Yeah, it was so interesting during the workshop. We heard many people read through the case studies and say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that." And then they would reach out to that person and say, "Tell me more about your story and let's talk more about your experience." And that was really rewarding because it, to your point, highlights these things that you didn't know. And there's a wealth of resources here that we hope can capture some of that and help ease the burden and facilitate getting these tools into the market. So we're coming to the end of our panel, so we will do one more last question, and I will kind of rapid fire 30 seconds or 60 seconds a piece. Let's start with you, Brian. What are the key insights or lessons learned that you would share with developers navigating the multi-market strategy for digital health tools?
Yeah, it's not something that we didn't necessarily have seen before, but it's that invest early in really understanding the regulatory divergence across the markets of interest, and that is to say retrospectively fitting out your the quality manual or the QMS for your software development. And so really that shines a light on just across these markets what's really important for it. Secondly is in terms of what we didn't see in the case studies was a lack of evidence generation and a commitment to good quality evidence. But what we did see was challenges in the translation across markets of that as well. So a second one is it's never early enough to start planning strategically your evidence generation strategy so that you have a multi-market kind of evidence dossier, or at least as close as possible to starting it as well. So the kind of two key things is both on the regulatory and quality side of your product development, and then on your evidence strategy side for me were important.
Let's go to you next, Marissa.
Thank you. I'd say in addition to the transparency that we now created in terms of resources and case studies, obviously, it's still so critical to invest in your network and get firsthand experience from other peers and companies who have actually already launched in a specific country, because DHT policy is still a novelty to both the industry and also the regulators. So some stuff might just not be in wet ink written down in terms of requirements or how to actually interpret them. So it's really critical to, in order to successfully navigate them, to just exchange with each other.
That's a great point. That's something that DIME really strives to do, is bring together these different companies and these the different stakeholders in the ecosystem to help build those networks. And I think it's our project team has been fantastic, and I hope that there have been networks and relationships that have been built and will continue to be built. And you're absolutely right. There's nothing like someone who's already been through it before. So Shani, let's close out with, what are the insights or lessons learned that you would take?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd say plus 1,000 to what Brian said, understand early, plan early. I know a lot of companies, it almost sounds obvious, but in practice, a lot of developers will kind of focus on 1 or 2 markets first and then think about other markets as an afterthought, right? Or a later activity they'll tack on. But the ability to plan and design clinical studies, human factor study, right, early, to incorporate additional populations, or to have the statistical justification of why your study can actually be extrapolated to additional populations if you want different countries, right? Or if you need a longer follow-up, or different things for the different stages of your product adoption, really, really helps with that time and cost that we were talking about. And then I think don't be afraid to engage with regulators is the other thing. This is such a rapidly developing area. Regulators are trying to find their way, right, alongside developers. And I found that sometimes they already have certain things in mind, but a lot of times they're very open to talking to companies, to learning, and to developing together what would be the right path.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the 3 of you coming and speaking with me. And I am now going to hand it over to Megan for our next panel.
All right. Hello. Great to see everyone again. Next panel, I am thrilled to welcome to the team Miguel Amador, who's from Complier, Jeroen Bergman, representing of many hats he wears, University of Oxford, Francesco Petracca, representing Bocconi University. And hello, welcome to the panel. Let's just dive right on into what we're talking about. And Francesco, I'm going to start with you, but what we've been talking about, and it's been mentioned in prior work here, is we've really been looking at clinical evidence requirements across different countries. We're trying to track what's taking place, and in an ideal world, as Shani and others are mentioning, we should be able to use clinical evidence outcomes across jurisdictions. Some cases that's worked really well, and other cases maybe not so well. We'd love to hear your perspectives on where you've seen successes on this, or anything that's been inhibiting this on a fuller scale.
Thank you very much, Megan. And I'll try to provide let's say, a simple answer to this complex question. I think that in general, we still have seen very limited examples of effective cross-country transferability of clinical evidence. Through this project and through its case studies, we have shown some examples, even though I think that overall we still have let's say, a closure posture that is prevalent with very few consolidated mechanisms for the transferability of clinical evidence. Why so? Well, I think that first of all in all, we're still in the infancy stage, as some of the previous speakers were mentioning. So if we look around, very few countries and jurisdictions to date have developed consolidated mechanisms especially for the patient access. So if we look at value assessment frameworks for digital health technologies. So all in all, I think we still have have had limited opportunities for cross-country collaboration and exchanging clinical evidence. However, I think the countries around the globe will have, enhanced opportunities for collaboration and also the necessity to collaborate. So I expect that to change in the immediate future. And also another comment I wanted to share is that when we discuss about clinical evidence transferability across different countries, I think we need to differentiate the comments based on the different stages of the full stack policy that we were mentioning before. So I think that if we stick to regulatory authorization, I envisage, let's say, a facilitated cross-country collaboration there. Not that I am expecting, for example, the MDR in Europe and the FDA to explicitly collaborate, as we're still talking about industrial policy matters in which we also have some competitiveness implications. But still, I think that the requirements there can be harmonized. So, for example, it will be on the developers to develop an evidence generation plan that can be used for both jurisdictions. On the other hand, when we look at the value assessment frameworks, and so the patient access of digital health technologies, there things get more complex. So we have discussed also looking at the Oviva case study, the possibility to use evidence generated elsewhere to be granted access into a country through these fast-track mechanisms that several European countries have been introducing. However, when we get to the permanent reimbursement stage, I think there are contextual factors that come into play. So, for example, the local epidemiology, the organization of the different care processes, and also the standard of care that is different. So I think there we still have a longer way to go to actually create the conditions for a consistent, continuous transferability of clinical evidence across the different jurisdictions.
Thank you. That was incredibly comprehensive. Miguel, if you have something to jump in with that, we'd welcome that too.
Just reinforcing a quick point that is regulation often is seen as a boogeyman for what is called innovation, but truly what we learn on this journey is that we need a clear regulation because that will set the trust mechanism between all the players, what's expected. So often the challenge is what kind of clinical evidence do we need is the question that we should force for harmonization and agreement, because that will set for innovators a much more clear landscape how to go forward. And as an example, we see for the lack of guidelines in Europe, notified bodies using FDA guidance to set what to expect to assess, for instance, AI solutions in healthcare. And this is a bit of this challenge of pushing for good guidance and that's good regulation, not just because those are rules, but things for all the players set what you can agree that we need and leave the small details that really need to be localized in the end, but in a clear fashion. So you can reuse most of the things, not just because there are different rules, but really there are different contexts that needs to be taken into account.
So a lot of work to be done yet on that front. And I want your one to bring you into the discussion here, because what we've looked at more recently with all of this is the pace of legislation regulation is changing incredibly fast. As I mentioned, one country just stood up an entire set of regulations from the time that we started this project till when we've launched, and others are in progress. Things are happening real time, and that is fantastic. But anyone who says regulation moves slowly may be right, but when you take it into context of the global ecosystem, that is furthest from the truth that I've seen right now. And I hope the pace continues, but I'm curious from your side, how you see these new frameworks and pace of this happening really impacting developers and patients themselves.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that question. I think that's a very good question to start with, because the aim, of course, for both the patients and developers is to get safe devices in the hands of clinicians that can help the patients. And because of the speed of technology in terms of development, we see that these regulatory frameworks are trying to catch up. And that's a good thing, as we said, but the key thing that we're looking for both the manufacturers as well as for patients is kind of clarity. So what is it exactly that we need to have in place in order to get these devices into the hands of the clinicians? And in order to create that clarity, normally a little bit of time is needed. So we see a lot of these ideas coming up without yet being tested, without yet having a lot of data behind them in terms of how they would work in practice. And that is causing some troubles. But I think what a project like this has done really well is to showcase all these different initiatives that are going on, and for the opportunity to compare and to see, okay, where do we see things are causing some issues, and how can we better develop that for the next set of frameworks. So I think the patients and the developers can really benefit from the range of different ways that we see across different countries, although we are really trying to get harmonization going. Luckily, any kind of disadvantage sometimes has an advantage, and in this case, it's kind of allowing us to look across these different approaches and see where things are getting stuck. And I think that clarity thing is really the key part that we see coming back, providing clarity for the clinicians, for the patients, for the developers, and that means that the governments need to kind of take an active part in that.
Oh, that's a perfect lead-in. Thank you. So next question I want to pose. We have talked a lot about digital health technology developers today, and rightfully so. A lot of our resources are really focused on that group because it's so critical for them to have clarity, as you just mentioned. That said, the pace of change impacts other stakeholder groups too. So I would love to pose the question, how do we support policymakers in this? So knowing that policymakers are embarking on developing entirely new frameworks, they're looking at maybe even modifying their own frameworks. How do we go about really giving them the support they need to be able to do all of this hard work to enable what we've been really setting out to do here as a broader ecosystem? Francesco, would you like to take the lead on that to start?
Yeah, sure. Another very complex question, but I echo what was just said by Jérôme. So I think that basically, first of all, it's a cultural shift. So I mean, as of now, I think that in the digital health ecosystem, pretty much everyone has way more questions than solid responses. And so basically, I think first of all, we need to realize that from the policymakers, decision makers, and regulators side, we need to find a way to go over just reactive approaches and find solutions to be adaptive in a way, also responding to the continuous evolution in the ecosystem from the technological side. So that is an initial point. I think that to date, especially when we look at drugs and medical devices, we have been considering the different phases of, again, the policy full stack at different silos, basically. So basically, you go through the regulatory authorization, and then once that is done and dusted, you can go over to the next one. This is hardly viable in the digital health field, and as pretty much all of the different stages are interacting one with the other one, given that technologies continuously evolve and so on and so forth. So I think that the first lesson, or at least the first resources that we can share with decision makers, is a cultural one. So basically support them in being able to face this challenge, which is a very complex one, and to basically adopt some life cycle approaches to these technologies and not looking at them as different silos over a single process. Having said that, as a researcher, and I think pretty much everyone involved in this project was a researcher during this entire endeavor, I think that we need to also inform them through evidence. Of course, it is something that everyone needs and policymakers do need, of course. We have been seeing that not only countries are learning one with the other one based on the solutions that they are proposing, but we're also seeing a stronger convergence between scientific academic recommendations and the different pathways and frameworks that the governments have been setting up. So I think it's fundamental also from our end to also continuously provide robust evidence to inform and support the decision makers. And finally, I would say that also, as this is not only decision, I mean, it's not only on the decision makers, but it's an ecosystem effort. I think having opportunities such as these is fundamental to continuously create link, opportunities to exchange opinions, dialogue, create connections. And this is fundamental, again, in such a complex and ever-changing context as that of digital health technologies, in my opinion.
Jeroen, any other thoughts to add into what was already said? But the idea of supporting across the board is very critical.
Yeah, I think a lot of good points already made. I think evidence is king. So even within kind of the assessment of these different frameworks and these regulations, we have to think about what is the data that we need. It also means that policymakers have to kind of look at how can they make data available so it becomes easier and easier to map this. And again, this project is a good example on the value of mapping the available information. But the more policy and governments can help with mapping that data, the more external organizations like universities, like research institutes, like associations can help to support the discussion and kind of get the best outcome for patients, clinicians, as well as governments.
And wrapping us out on this one, Miguel, you spend a lot of time supporting product developers directly, whether it's through these resources or other modalities. How do we help developers really navigate this changing landscape?
Really, in a short way, we learned this doing even the AI paper where we came across some multiple frameworks. So every entity, university, institution had this new framework to assess AI in healthcare. And what is important when we look to these resources is for manufacturers to understand where the really rules and policies and frameworks will come from, even informed by all this work that is being done. It's important to understand where to expect this harmonization, this work, and things that will really be in place. So they can really monitor the work that is being done, because a lot of these ongoing efforts are ongoing. So a lot of the things manufacturers can be prepared is not looking what is the rules for today, but what could be the draft papers of rules of guidance for tomorrow, and we try to map that as much as possible and map the entities and organizations that in a way will have a role of changing things, because things will change, and it's important to understand where that change will come and which change they should monitor.
And I like that all of us are here gathered for this project in particular, but we're all involved in different initiatives too that are really aligned and supporting this effort. So the fact that we can be working together in this environment and then across all these other global entities, really trying to make sure that there is harmonization and support across the board, is really encouraging. So I am going to wrap us off of this one and just say thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your work on this. It's been countless hours in meetings for this panel, the prior panel team, and then everyone else who's been a part of this. So with that, I'm going to provide a few closing insights before I turn over to Jen. But we've been talking a lot across the board here, really focused on these 8 countries that we've identified. And what we are asking and aiming to do is we really want to drive more impact and more visibility in what's taking place around the world. So if you don't see your country listed here, if you think that we should be looking somewhere else, we'd love to have a discussion around what partnership that could be focused on adding the countries and really making sure we have this resource on our website, an evolving one and one that grows and really expands over time, and really demonstrates all the opportunities that exist in a multi-market ecosystem for digital health technologies. So I see my colleague has dropped the regulatory.dimesociety.org email into the chat. Please use that. We'd love to hear your thoughts both on this and then also any other commentary you may have on what's taking place for updates within the countries themselves, as Lacey mentioned. A few couple other announcements to bring to your attention. We have another webinar, a launch event coming up on December 10th. And it really does tie in really well to what we're doing here today and takes the focus from digital health technologies and really puts that focus onto digital clinical measures. So that is an area that I recommend everyone join on. And then we also have a project that we've been really focused on and really trying to understand how pharma companies and life sciences companies can really scale digital health within the organizations themselves. So this is an initiative that will be launching in the new year. If anyone is interested, we have a QR code. We have a link there. And then last up, we have the DIME Seal. And DIME recently announced this process. It's a new evaluation platform for digital health software products. And we think it ties really well to this too, where a lot of people are trying to identify what does good look like and how do I demonstrate my product's ability in evidence, in privacy and security and usability with equity. So we encourage product developers, evaluators, and anyone else in this ecosystem to look at the website, learn more, contact us with any questions. But with all that said, announcements aside, Jen Goldsack is the CEO of Dime, and I'm really pleased to bring her into the discussion today. She was instrumental in getting this project launched and in all the other things that we've been really focusing on within Dime. So I welcome her to provide some insights from her side, given that she's been here every step of the way. Jen.
Fantastic, and absolutely delighted to be here today on this, I think, important day for our field. The first thing I want to do is thank you, Megan and Lacey, for your leadership of this work, and most importantly, our project partners. All of the work that we do at Dime is a direct consequence of your leadership, your expertise, and your commitment to advancing the field. There are tremendous resources here. I'm incredibly proud of them, and I'm incredibly grateful for your leadership in all of this work over the last few months and in everything you do at your companies on a daily basis to drive things forward. It's been a wonderful discussion today, and so there's not much net new that I need to say, but I do think that there are a few points that warrant emphasis as we wrap up our discussion. One of the questions I hear often at sort of conferences and in discussions is, oh gosh, well, where are we with, regulatory harmonization for digital products? And, the reality is different regulatory regions are always going to sort of demand autonomy. We don't have perfect regulatory harmonization, or frankly, too much close to it for any other medical product. And I think that the reality is we shouldn't expect it for digital. That said, it's not that often that we are able to advance essentially a brand new sort of sub-industry during the course of a career. And I think all of us on the line recognize the opportunity as regulations of digital products are essentially wet clay for us to do as much as we can to harmonize where that's possible and where that's not possible for many, many good reasons. How do we actually think about creating resources, information, tools to support digital health product developers in accessing a global market? The reality is that the investment that is going into the development of high quality, trustworthy digital health products requires a global go-to-market strategy. And if we believe collectively in the power of digital health solutions to drive towards a global healthcare ecosystem that is actually sustainable, and that's something that we are struggling with in high, middle, and low-income countries alike, then we need to figure out how we make it feasible, commercially feasible, for product developers to access multiple markets. It's essential for the product developers, and most importantly, it's essential for the patients that we believe we can support through the use and through the development of these novel technologies. So this work today and that we've launched today, and the resources that we've provided to guide digital health product developers in the most efficient research and evidence collection to meet the needs of regulatory authorities across multiple regions is going to be powerful as a commercial strategy. And those individuals who actually think a priori about what their global go-to-market strategy looks like, the patients that they can serve globally, and reference these resources in order to build their evidence plans, are going to win in this market. And when leading product developers take that kind of approach, we can be confident that patients will also win, excuse me, because they will have the earliest access to life-changing digital health solutions. This is the kind of pragmatic approach that we need to see in digital innovation. We cannot sit around wringing our hands, waiting for the perfect set of regulations. There are thoughtful, intentional regulations. Megan, you gave really great examples of the pace of regulatory advancement. Through the course of this project, we did have particular regions that went from zero to a comprehensive set of sort of policies. And the reality is that regulation always follows innovation. It is never, whether in healthcare or any other industry, to be the job of government or regulators to define the scope of the possible. That is the job of industry. And I believe with the tools that this project team has created, we have opened the door to really thoughtful, really intentional global market capture and global market impact when it comes to bringing high quality, trustworthy digital health products to market. So all that's left to say is, again, to our project teams, thank you for your leadership, both in support of this critically important work and in the work you do every day at your organizations. And to all of you on the line, we built these resources for you. We built them so you could take them off the shelf and use them to shape, scope, and optimize your global go-to-market strategies so that you can be as effective and as likely to be successful as possible as we think about the transformation of healthcare in the digital era. So with that, Megan, I'm going to hand it back to you. I'm incredibly excited about the impact this work will have, and kudos to you and Lacey once again.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone. It's been an honor and a privilege, and that wraps up our time. So we will be in touch with next steps. Follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll be sharing more thought leadership pieces and resources, but we hope this is of great value, and we look forward to talking more soon. Thank you all.